So in this one, it's myself and Ryan McDaniel from the Views from the 573 podcast, and we're talking about running backs in this class. And running back is such an interesting position this year. It's such a mishmash, but me and Ryan try to make some sense of this whole thing. Let's shift gears here. Let's talk about some running backs here. So, Ryan, this running back class, I have ranked a whole bunch of dudes. I have 7 guys, I think it is, in my tier 1 of running backs. And really, I shouldn't even call it tier 1. To me, there are no tier 1 running backs this year. There's just a bunch of tier 2 guys. And what's going to determine my rankings on these guys as we get into rookie draft season, it's going to be landing spot. Is that kind of how you're feeling about these guys? Is landing spot's going to help you kind of go through the mishmash of these rookie running backs?
Yeah, I kind of get that feeling. It just feels like a lot of these guys are kind of in the same kind of area as far as like their talent, where they're ranked. And I do think it does depend on where these guys land because maybe somebody like, I don't know, Trey Benson might work out better than Jonathon Brooks in Dallas or somebody like that, or vice versa. So it does, I think, ultimately depend on where these running backs end up landing. And who knows where we'll see the run start. I've kind of thought, it's going to start in the late second round with Dallas. So we'll see. But I think I'm right there with you. This group is just kind of like these guys are basically all around that same area of where they're ranked.
Is there anybody who is, do you have an apple of your eye? Is there anyone you really like?
I mean, it's funny you say that when there's a Tennessee running back that's in this group.
Sell him on me. Tell me a little bit about Jalen Wright.
Oh, man. So Jalen, he came in as a guy that ran some track and did not have a lot of weight on him. Now, he's got a little bit of weight on him. He's 210, ran a 4.38 40, had a really good, draft process in leading up to this. Last year, ran for over 1,000 yards. He only had 4 touchdowns, but that's because that Tennessee backfield, it was just like split between 3 guys. But last year was able to really hone in. He was able to go in between the tackles. And early on in his career, he had some fumbling issues. And it seems like last year, he quit that, didn't get fumbled a whole lot. I don't think he even had a fumble in that game. But I feel like if he can learn to go into an NFL offense compared to the Tennessee offense, because the Tennessee offense, as much as I love it, there are some gimmicks to it. Although I will push back on some of that stuff from time to time. But if he gets into a good offense, he's got a top speed that if he can hit it, oh boy, watch out because he'll get 6 real quick. And I feel like he can run in between the tackles. So I feel like he's a guy that can do both. I don't think if he didn't catch the ball a whole lot. And so I don't know how much about that. So as far as Jalen, listen, I love him. He went to UT, and UT running backs have here lately, even though there's been a few of them, they've done pretty well when they've gone to the NFL. So I feel like, yeah, I like Jalen as far as this group, but Brooks is good too. I like Jonathon Brooks. I like Benson, but Wright is my guy.
Of course he is, Ryan. That surprises me 0% for sure. I've got James Cook down as kind of my comparison for him. And I said that in a very glowing light. Like I really like Jalen Wright too. I think he is currently my running back 3 behind Benson and Brooks. To me, Jonathon Brooks, if he gets drafted in round 2, that to me is a stamp of approval from the NFL on his health. We're good to go. Wheels up. Let's fly. And then Jonathon Brooks catapults up my board entirely. If Jonathon Brooks gets drafted in round 4, he's off my board entirely. If he's drafted in round 3, I don't know what to do. That's kind of where I'm at with Jonathon Brooks. Because to me, Ryan, and correct me if I'm wrong here, so much of the question with him is just health. He's probably the best running back in this class, right?
Yes. I mean, last year before he tore his ACL, he missed the final 3 games. He ran for over 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards to be exact. Had 10 touchdowns, 6.1 average yards per carry. Like you're thinking he's going to come. Here's this guy coming in behind Bijan, and he just does really well in his place and runs for over 1,000 yards. He did have 286 yards catching last year, so it shows a little bit that he can catch a little bit. Had caught 25 balls last year. Did have a touchdown. So I look at him as like the question is health, is ACL. How quick can he come back? The production, I don't have an issue with because we know he can be productive stepping into a role that he did last year with Texas.
And Ryan, for our purposes here of Dynasty Fantasy Football, and you know this as an NFL fan, these running back lifespans are so short nowadays, right?
Yes.
And so for Dynasty, really, these running backs, you need them to come through for you in year one or at year two at the latest, right? Because once you get past year two, all of a sudden the guy's 25 years old. And you're like, we're not too far away. We're closer to that cliff than we are to like your prime now,
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that with Brooks, it really is a struggle for me because the way I play Dynasty Fantasy Football is when I have a running back, I either A, want him to cost me absolutely nothing. I want to just, hey, Jerome Ford off the free agent market, come on and be on the back of my bench. I hope you get an opportunity, right? And then when the opportunity comes, he's really good for me, and that's how I get points. Or I have heavily invested in you, right? Brees Hall, right? I paid up. You are awesome, and I knew you'd be awesome, and that's great. So either I want immediate production that I paid for, or I want no cost, and I hope for production. Jonathon Brooks is going to live in this weird middle ground, I think, where it's like, he's going to cost something for dynasty drafts because he is pretty objectively the best running back in this class. However, I don't really feel like I'm going to be able to get that immediate opportunity I would want at that cost. So that's kind of where I'm at with Jonathon Brooks for dynasty purposes. It's really kind of a struggle. I would love it if my Baltimore Ravens took him. I think that would be really, really good to have him behind Derrick Henry for a year. I think for an NFL standpoint, that's great. That's great. Dynasty fantasy, he really gives me a little bit of a headache at night. I got three other guys here I want to highlight for you if you're okay with it. I've got Trey Benson, Blake Corum, and Braelon Wright. I'm not Braelon Wright, Braelon Allen. I'm not letting you talk about Jalen Wright again. Braelon Allen. Let's start there. Let's start with Braelon Allen because I feel like he is the opposite of Jalen Wright, right? Jalen Wright, he's the kind of running back I love for my dynasty team. Where you're right, Ryan, he can get 6 yards out of nowhere, right? He gets shot out of cannon. He catches the ball, big plays, explosive plays. I love that stuff. Braelon Allen is kind of the running back I really enjoy watching in the NFL. For fantasy purposes, though, he doesn't catch passes. It's going to require him to get like 20 carries in order to have good games, like good stat lines, because he's not just going to get 6 yards out of nowhere. He's going to get 6 yards because he dragged 4 guys to get it, Is that kind of your assessment on Braelon Allen also?
Yeah, there's some Derrick Henry here.
There could be.
And some of the, yeah. There's some Derrick Henry here. Now, the great thing about it is he's around 21. He's still a young running back, but he's had a lot of carries in the Wisconsin system. I'm just looking at it. He had 106 his freshman year, 230 his sophomore year, and 181 his junior year. So he's had a whole lot of carries, and 597 carries in 3 years at Wisconsin. But again, if you get him into a system where you're probably, limiting his carries, that's great as far as an NFL standpoint. But for fantasy and dynasty purposes, it's not what you want. It's not what you want to see. And maybe it could be a situation where it's like it took Derrick Henry, where he wasn't the starter right away. It just took him a couple years, and then bam, he was ready to take off, literally.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, and it's where the game theory, the game situation comes into a dynasty. I feel like with that profile, it's just far more likely he's Damian Harris, right? Really good player. I like Damian Harris a lot during his time in New England. Kind of a touchdown maker, right? But Ryan, you do play fantasy. You know how frustrating Damian Harris was from time to time, where it's like,
yeah,
when do you play this guy? Because if he doesn't get that touchdown, he got you 14 carries for about 50 yards, and that was that, And that's what I see a whole career out of for Braelon Allen, unless he's really, really good. Like, unless he is Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, right? Like, if he is that damn good, then sure, it can hit. But he's got to be at that special level. And it's just really hard to ever put that on a guy, especially in a class that, again, we don't feel like it's that great, right? Like, there are marked differences between how we felt about Derrick Henry back in the day when he was towering over Mark Ingram, right, at the national championship game. Like, there are different feelings between that guy and this guy, even though he does have a little Derrick Henry to his game. Trey Benson's another one who a lot of people really like, myself included. He's my RB2 behind just Jonathan Brooks right now. Trey Benson, how do you feel about him?
Trey, he's kind of another big running back. He's 6 foot 216. He's a bigger type of guy. Didn't run for over 1,000 yards in his 2 seasons as the lead back at Florida State. Got close for some of them, but I think he's a guy that he's going to run hard for you, and I think that's going to be, for some teams, that's what you want. He's got a little bit of a burst to him. Yeah, I have to take a look at his 40 time. He ran a 4.39, so that's really good for Benson. So he can offer a little bit of a punch there, but can really just take you outside and get to the end zone. And I feel like I'm looking at Dane Brugler's The Beast right here. He put in here, cut in the Melvin Gordon mold, as it projects as far as being an NFL committee type of thing.
But okay, you know what? I like that a lot, and maybe that's why I like Trey Benson, because I really like Melvin Gordon, and I think it's one of those things where it's like he's not as big as Braelon Allen, right? Like, Braelon Allen's a really big guy. Like, he's Brandon Jacobs, right? But Trey Benson's a big guy, like he's a feature back level of size, but like you said, though, 4.39 speed. And so Melvin Gordon, like, gosh, I love that, because I think Melvin Gordon, like, he actually, in that write-up, he mentioned that Melvin Gordon kind of a committee guy. I think my own personal memories of Melvin Gordon are that, like, he was a lead guy. And Austin Eckler eventually came around and was kind of a pass-catching specialist at first. Like, Austin Eckler's never really taken a ton of work away from Melvin Gordon. And Danny Woodhead even before that, right? Like, that'd be a really good outcome for Trey Benson. I would be really, really happy with that as someone who's pretty big on Trey Benson, if he just is Melvin Gordon. And I would have to bring back my old gimmick, the Melvin o'clock. When Melvin, I used to text all my friends, it's Melvin o'clock. And I had to bring that. It's Trey o'clock. I'd have to bring that back. Let's talk about national champion Blake Corum. Ryan, I don't really have many strong feelings on Blake Corum. He seems like a pretty good running back who was in a really good situation in college. Is that the right read?
Yeah, he was in a great situation at Michigan with the way they played. 100%. Yeah,
like, he's a pretty good running back.
Yeah, Corum is one of the guys I mentioned on Views, is one of the guys that I'm more so kind of down on, and I'm looking at his stats. I mean, he has a lot of carries under his belt already. Just in the last 2 years alone, one in his, I guess, senior year, I forget if the COVID year was still in effect, but in that year in 2022, he had 247. Then last year, had 258. And this is already with the good running back at Michigan with Donovan Edwards that was splitting time with him. And so I'm kind of looking at him. I don't remember him making that much of a dent in a passing game. Like, I'm looking at it through his career. Like, he only had 411 receiving yards total through his career. And so not really that much of an impact in the passing game. And for fantasy, that plays a big part with these running backs.
Absolutely.
And so for me, I'm just kind of like down on him and like him being involved in the passing game and being an effective, type of third down guy. And you look at his height. I mean, sure, he can find himself some wiggle room, but he's 5'7", and looking at his age too, he's already 23. So
yeah, like we said, that means you're 2 years away from the point where I start to look at that age number, and I start to get a little queasy on it, as a soon-to-be 30-year-old. It does sound quite mean that I'm picking on these, pick on someone your own size, right? Like I'm talking to these 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds. Like you're young, but that 23-year-old, I'm worried about him. One other guy at running back who I want to make sure we touch on, and that's Bucky Irving. I think Bucky just seems like a really fun player. A little bit of a gadget guy, but I think Bucky just seems like a really fun player. Do you have anything on him?
Bucky, yeah, he's kind of a little bit of a gadget player. He's 5'9", 192, and
Little Dexter.
I don't. Yeah, he's an undersized guy, and he's not going to offer a lot of power. But that we talked about Blake Corum not having any pass catching skills. Bucky has those.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what kind of he can bring to an NFL team is that, yeah, sure, maybe he can run in between the tackles a couple times, but I think he's really going to make his mark in that passing game and just like helping out a quarterback.
I know, pretty obviously, Dallas and the Chargers are kind of the two big landing spots that we all want these guys to go to, right? Like whoever gets drafted by Dallas, whoever gets drafted by the LA Chargers, I think they're unquestionably going to be the top two running backs that we view for fantasy purposes coming out of this draft. For Bucky, because it's kind of a pass catching specialist, I think there's a lot of places he can land and fill that role and be a pretty useful player. I think just kind of looking at teams here, like if he could land in the Jets and kind of be a pass catcher alongside Breece Hall, he can have some immediate value. If he lands in that role in like Jacksonville, but him with ETN and kind of he's the pass catching guy there. There's a few others, like there's Tampa Bay, if he can kind of fill that role and kind of knock the one thing Rachaad White is good at, but if he can kind of take that, if he can go to New Orleans and maybe supplant Kamara in that for next year, potentially, there's a lot of places for him to land where he can get on the football field, which is really good for him versus a lot of these other guys. It's like, okay, if you don't land in LA, if you don't land in Dallas, you're probably waiting behind a guy, like if you're not in one of those two spots, you're going to have to beat someone out. And there's beatable spots, right? Again, Rachaad White, I hate to crap on for 2 years in a row, but Rachaad White, right? He's like a guy who I'm just waiting for someone to beat out. I think, people don't love this one on me, but LA Rams, right? Like I don't love Kyren Williams. I think that's another spot where I can see one of these guys going and beating them out pretty quickly. Do you have landing spots in mind on these running backs? Guys where, again, I'm going to remove Dallas, I'm going to remove the Chargers. I'm not going to let you take the easy answers here because those are the two really easy ones. So are there any other landing spots that you look at for these running backs and go, that guy can get a pretty quick opportunity?
Well, I mean, I was already going to say Blake Corum for the Chargers because, it makes sense. Harbaugh getting one of his Michigan guys.
Anyone for the Chargers, though, right? Like, it doesn't even have to be Corum. It could be anybody. Trey Benson. It could be anybody.
I mean, the Giants come to mind. The Giants come to mind for one of these guys. Saquon, I believe they signed Devin Singletary.
Yep.
So it's just like, get somebody there. I'm trying to think of the Saints you mentioned. That's a good one because I'm a little bit unsure about Kamara, too.
Mm-hmm. And Jamal Williams looked totally done. And Kendra Miller, I like him, but he wasn't impressive at all as a rookie. So there
Carolina
is there. Yeah, that's a good shout too, for sure. Because Miles Sanders, my goodness, is he bad? And Chuba Hubbard played well last year, but it's another guy though. It's another guy, kind of like how I feel about Kyren, totally beatable though. Yeah, those are actually, man, Carolina. I don't want to get too excited about like theoretical possibilities of like what if Bryce Young is good but just wasn't allowed to be good for a year because of like circumstances and like everything around him. But like, they bring in Deontay Johnson. If they draft another receiver in round 2, if in a deep receiver class, we're gonna talk about that in another video. And then also if they draft a running back in like round 3. All of a sudden, you got some pieces there in Carolina pretty quickly. All of a sudden, that could become something. Ryan, are there any other running backs that you say this is one of my guys that we have not touched on?
Looking at this list, I mean, I think it's probably more so one of Rebecca's guys, but Cody Schrader. It's
Sure.
probably I think somebody that, you saw what he did at Mizzou last year and like, okay, I like that guy. I want him on my roster. He might be a third or second running back, but man, will he bring some toughness to that running back room. Um, I'm taking a look. Marshawn Lloyd is a guy I've been hearing a whole lot of. He didn't really have a lot of opportunity at USC. That's something that, in the college football season, that was kind of brought up. It's like, there are times where they went to him, but then there are times like, okay, just let Caleb go and, kind of do his thing, which nothing wrong with that. I mean, Caleb's going to go number one, but, Marshawn Lloyd, I feel like is a guy that could see a lot of opportunity if he goes to the right spot. He's 5'8", 220, ran a 4.46. So there's some opportunity for him there. And I believe as far as other guys, I think that's it. I'm looking at Ray Davis. I'm looking at Will Shipley. There are a couple other guys. Shipley was a top guy coming out of high school, but just at Clemson, just like I don't know what kind of happened here to where he's like a 4th or 5th round pick. But as far as those guys, I think those are pretty much the guys that we're kind of looking at as like, okay, these are the guys. Brooks, Corum, Benson, Wright, those guys.
So once again, that was myself and Ryan McDaniel of the Views from the 573 podcast talking about the rookie running backs. I'm going to hop on with Ryan yet this week, and we're going to do another mock draft. We're going to talk about these rookies even more in depth on his channel. So check that out. I've got all the links down in the description below.